the detective closed our file after 14 months, and he actually apologized to me over the phone, telling me some missing person cases simply never resolve, that I might need to prepare myself to live without ever knowing what happened to my husband. My name is Renee Castillo. I was 36 years old when my husband Marcus disappeared, and I spent 3 years believing he was either dead or trapped somewhere he desperately wanted to escape from. I never once considered that he might simply be 26 minutes away, living an entirely ordinary life he had chosen for himself. Before I tell you what a single credit card statement finally revealed, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching this from tonight. Marcus vanished on an ordinary Tuesday. He left for work that morning, kissed me goodbye the same way he always did, and simply never came home. His car was found 2 days later at a rest stop nearly 4 hours from our house, keys still in the ignition, wallet still inside the glove compartment, no sign of struggle, no note, nothing. The police investigated thoroughly at first. They questioned his coworkers, checked his phone records up until the day he disappeared, searched nearby wooded areas, treated it, understandably, as a potential abduction or worse. I spent those first months existing in a strange, suspended grief, unable to properly mourn someone whose death had never actually been confirmed, unable to fully hope either, because hope without answers becomes its own particular kind of exhausting. My cousin Talia was one of the people who showed up constantly during those early months. She brought meals, sat with me during police interviews, helped organize a search effort through our small community. We had always been close growing up, more like sisters than cousins given our mothers were sisters themselves. Her support during that period felt like the only steady thing keeping me upright. Stay with me, because the moment I finally understood what that steady support had actually been covering for is the exact moment 3 years of grief turned into something far more complicated. Around the 18-month mark, most people around me gently suggested I begin considering him legally deceased, primarily for practical reasons involving our shared finances and the house we still jointly owned. I resisted for another full year, unable to sign paperwork that felt like giving up on him completely. What finally broke the case open wasn't detective work exactly, it was boredom and a stubborn refusal to stop checking. I still had access to our old joint credit account, largely inactive since his disappearance, except for a small annual fee that kept posting automatically. One evening, reviewing old statements out of habit more than purpose, I noticed a single decline transaction attempt from several months after Marcus vanished, at a home improvement store 2 towns over from ours, using a card I had assumed was completely dormant. The transaction had been declined because the card itself was expired, but the attempt still generated a record, complete with a merchant location. I sat with that information for nearly a week before deciding to actually drive there myself, telling almost no one what I was doing, half convinced I was chasing nothing more than a strange coincidence or a stolen card number. I hired a private investigator instead of going alone, a retired detective named Frank who specialized in exactly this kind of quiet, unofficial digging that overwhelmed police departments rarely have resources to pursue years after a case goes cold. Frank traced the store's security footage archive, long since deleted for that specific date, but he found something more useful: a customer loyalty account registered under a name I didn't immediately recognize, linked to an address in a suburban development I had genuinely never heard of. Here's something I would honestly love your opinion on in the comments. If you spent years grieving someone as dead, only to discover they were alive this entire time, do you think the shock would hit harder than the betrayal itself, or does the betrayal completely overshadow everything else the moment you learn the truth? Frank confirmed the address belonged to a household with 2 listed adult residents. One name meant absolutely nothing to me. The other was my cousin Talia. I want to be honest about what happened next, because it wasn't cinematic or immediate. I sat in Frank's car outside that house for nearly 2 hours before I found the nerve to walk up to the door myself. When it finally opened, Marcus stood there, older, his hair longer than I had ever seen it, wearing a shirt I did not recognize, holding a toddler on his hip who had his exact same eyes. He did not run. He did not look surprised in the frantic way I expected. He looked, more than anything, like a man who had simply been waiting for a day he always knew would eventually arrive. Talia appeared behind him in the doorway within seconds, and her face did something I will never fully forget. Not shock exactly, more like exhausted relief. The specific look of someone finally allowed to stop performing an exhausting role they had been playing for years. Marcus explained everything slowly, sitting across from me at their own kitchen table, while I held myself together through sheer stubbornness alone. He told me our marriage had been quietly failing for over a year before he disappeared, something I genuinely had not seen coming, though looking backward I could recognize distance I had simply mistaken for stress at the time. He said Talia had comforted him during that difficult period, that their relationship crossed a line neither of them originally intended, and that facing me directly with the truth felt impossible once it had already gone that far. Rather than asking for a divorce honestly, he told me he panicked and made an impulsive, deeply selfish decision to simply disappear entirely, assuming enough time and distance would somehow make an eventual return or an eventual confession feel less catastrophic than it actually was. What made this significantly worse than a simple affair was Talia's role during those searching years. She had known where he was almost from the very beginning, had visited him secretly throughout the search effort she herself was helping organize, had sat beside me during police interviews knowing information that could have ended the entire investigation within days. I asked her directly how she managed to comfort me at my most desperate, knowing exactly where he was the entire time. She said she told herself, repeatedly, that telling me would destroy everyone involved, including their own relationship, and that staying silent felt, at the time, like the only way to protect people she loved, even though protecting them meant deliberately prolonging my grief for years. Marcus was never criminally charged for his disappearance itself, since adults have a legal right to simply leave their lives behind, however cruel that choice may be to everyone left behind wondering. However, Talia's active participation in obstructing missing person resources, along with false statements she provided directly to investigating officers regarding contact with Marcus, resulted in separate legal consequences once local authorities reopened elements of the original case. Our divorce finalized within the year, straightforward given the circumstances, though our finances remained complicated by nearly 3 years of assumed widowhood paperwork I had to formally unwind. Marcus and Talia remained together, eventually marrying quietly, though most of our extended family cut contact with both of them once the full story became known. I moved away from our small community within 8 months, partly for a fresh start, partly because running into either of them at a grocery store felt like more than I could reasonably handle while still healing. I still struggle, honestly, with knowing exactly how to categorize those 3 years now, whether they were years of grief for someone genuinely lost, or years of an elaborate deception I simply hadn't yet uncovered. I think, ultimately, they were both things simultaneously, and I have stopped trying to force that contradiction into something simpler than it actually was. If this story affected you, subscribe to Unheard Drama Stories and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, along with whether you think Marcus or Talia carries the heavier betrayal in this entire situation.